Red Dead Redemption 2 tells the story of the dying days of the Van der Linde gang. Well, more accurately, months, but you get what I'm trying to say. In that time, we see the gang devolve from this tight-knit family into a den of paranoid criminals, as they frantically try to escape the encroachment of modern society. In this time, they come to blows with rival outlaw factions and various bodies of law enforcement that are by and large more organised than they used to be. And that is perhaps best demonstrated by the organisation that's tracking Dutch and his boys down across the entire story. I am of course talking about Red Dead Redemption 2's depiction of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. So I thought I'd do a video on them and construct it a bit like my gang case studies, but with a bit of a twist. So, please enjoy. Now, the presence of Pinkertons in Red Dead Redemption 2 is quite interesting because everything else is made up. You play as made-up characters in a fictional story in fictional states in the US that just simply don't exist. Historical events, figures, organizations, and so on where possible are referenced to by proxy with parody equivalents. But the Pinkertons were, or should I say are, because they're still around today, a real thing. And Rockstar and Take-Two Interactive kind of sort of got sued for featuring them in the game. So to avoid also getting sued, we're going to be exploring the Pinkertons in a historical context first, before shifting onto the events of the game, focusing on the fictional character of Agent Andrew Milton. So of course, let's begin with the historical aspect and move from there. And yes, I slapped cinema bars on there deliberately, for effect. The story begins in the 1850s with a Scottish-American man named Alan Pinkerton, who along with a Chicago attorney named Edward Rucker would form the Northwestern Police Agency, which would become known as the Pinkerton Agency. Pinkerton would employ his espionage skills to attract clients, and after consultations with several businesses, it became clear there was a market for private detective services, and the Pinkerton Agency would hire women and minorities from its founding. This is because, though the practice was uncommon at the time, they would be useful as spies for that very reason. The Pinkertons would amass some recognition as a kind of forerunner to the United States Secret Service model, with the company being tasked to deliver the newly elected President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, to Washington, D.C. in the early 1860s. Pinkerton detective Kate Warne would be assigned the task. Through a plethora of disguises and limited sleep on her part along the way, Warne would successfully deliver the president to the capital city. It is believed the slogan, "We never sleep," would derive from this undertaking. Kate Warne is remembered as the first female detective in both the Pinkerton Detective Agency and United States. Just as a cool detail I thought I'd share. Lincoln would go on to contract Pinkerton agents to spy on the Confederacy and function as personal security to the president during the American Civil War. The official United States Secret Service, as seen today, would be founded in July of 1865, a few short months after President Lincoln's assassination that April. In the following decade, Congress would allocate $50,000 to the recently established Department of Justice system with the purpose of establishing a sub-organization dedicated to the detection and the prosecution of those who chiefly violated federal law. Since the fund wasn't nearly sufficient to construct an internal investigation division, the task would be contracted out to the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. It's over the next couple decades that the company would see the height of its power, being involved in crackdowns against striking workers. This came at a time when employers sought for greater control over those working for them. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency would frequently be hired to conduct anti-union activities on behalf of employers during the labour strikes of the late 19th century. They would be tasked with infiltrating unions, keeping strikers and unionists out of factories, and recruiting goon squads for the purpose of intimidation. In 1892, the Pinkertons were involved in breaking the Homestead strike in Pennsylvania, resulting in a violent confrontation. The Pinkertons were hired chiefly to protect the Pittsburgh area mill, but also to break up the strike. A firefight would ensue, resulting in the deaths of over a dozen men, including a few Pinkerton agents and a couple dozen further injuries. Private and government forces would break the strike, and workers returned to the steel mill. As just a brief overview of something no doubt far more complicated, As news spread about the Pinkertons' involvement in strike-breaking, lawmakers began to resist government contracts with the company. Following the Homestead strikes in 1893, Congress would take action and pass the Anti-Pinkerton Act, limiting the federal government's ability to hire private investigators and mercenaries. That said, the intent of the act was to only curtail the quasi-military armed forces for hire engaging in strike-breaking. The United States government remains to this day a massive customer to the private security industry. It's worth noting the Pinkertons didn't just disrupt union activity. As effective mercenaries, they would also take jobs as protection during industrial disputes across the United States, where their objective was to simply be present. The Pinkertons also engaged in other activities too, such as tracking down Western outlaws. Notorious names such as Jesse James, the Reno Gang, and the Wild Bunch were all on the agenda of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency at one point or another. The Pinkertons were aided by their Rogues Gallery, an early compiled criminal database containing many important details about suspects such as mugshots, identifying marks, criminal activity, locations where somebody might be familiar with or have ties to, and so on. They would keep files on their targets to research and track wanted men. And I suppose it's tracking these outlaws where the fictional events of Red Dead Redemption 2 would slot into the chronology. Set in 1899, the events of Red Dead Redemption 2 begin atop the mountains, to where the gang has fled following the Blackwater ferry job that wound up in a gunfight between them, law enforcement, and of course the Pinkertons, suffering casualties with 2 members, Jenny Kirk and Davy Callender, dead, and 2 members, Mac Callender and Sean Maguire, missing. On top of that, John Marston got shot and Charles Smith burnt his hand. It's unclear quite what happened, as the protagonist, Arthur Morgan, the man whose eyes we see the world through in this game, was not present. However, we're very quickly led to believe that it was a Pinkerton trap.
Do you think it was a trap in Blackwater?
That many men? Oh, they knew we were coming. But there was money on that boat, all right. Lots of it.
What really happened on that boat?
We had the money, it seemed fine. And suddenly they were everywhere.
Bounty hunters?
No, Pinkertons. It was crazy. Raining bullets.
Regardless, those struggles seem miles away. The gang, without the money looted from the Blackwater ferry job, still needs money, and instead of venturing west as planned, because they're on the run, they decide to go east. But not before hijacking and robbing a train owned by Leviticus Cornwall on the way. Unbeknownst to the gang, this act makes them a very rich and powerful adversary. Moving into Chapter 2, everything seems to go back to some degree of normal for the gang. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency doesn't actually show up for a bit, so we can just familiarise ourselves with this world and get connected with some of the events that have happened. For example, we can read an article following the botched ferry job detailing Blackwater's lockdown, which reads, after a bloody shootout that resulted in the seizure of a large quantity of banknotes being shipped by boat, Pinkerton agency officials have restricted access to the town of Blackwater while a massive manhunt is underway. Officials issued bounties on the heads of Dutch Vanderlind and his gang, commonly known as Dutch's Boys. Banks looked into shipping assets via boat as a more reliable means of transportation, impervious to thieves. The deadly attack resulted in the loss of $150,000, the largest robbery in the region in recent years. Authorities believe that the men may have stashed the money in Blackwater before fleeing. Reports indicate that many are searching high and low for the stash, upending public spaces and neighbours' gardens. Residents of Blackwater view the lockdown with contempt. Businesses who depend on shipments of dry goods, sundries and catalogue sales complain the Pinkertons have caused an unnecessary burden to life and welfare. The main takeaway from this article is just how high profile the Blackwater ferry robbery is. $150,000 in 1899, thanks to inflation, would equate to the spending power of millions upon millions of dollars in the modern day. And considering the Pinkertons were setting a trap for the gang anyway, managing to abscond with that much money, even if they had to stash it nearby before fleeing, Effectively, Dutch van der Linde would become public enemy number one and a massive person of interest to the Pinkertons if he wasn't already. If nothing else, the bounty on his head would be astronomical for the times, so that gives you an idea of just how high profile the van der Linde gang's actions within Blackwater would be. But we also learn about Pinkerton activity in Blackwater following the ferry heist. Simply put, they've swarmed the place, and this persists well until past the rescue mission for Sean Maguire.
Anyone been in the Blackwater, see how things lie?
Place is crawling with Pinkertons, bounty hunters, and pictures of Dutch and Hosea.
Well, we got a lot of money sitting in that town.
And that's where it's gonna remain for now.
So there's a small army of Pinkertons and bounty hunters in Blackwater, either hoping that somebody from the gang would return for the money, or perhaps ensuring that if the money is still there, that the gang remains cut off from it. But it's not until later on in Chapter 2 where Arthur Morgan comes face to face with the Pinkertons. Whilst fishing with Jack Marston, Arthur Morgan finally meets Agent Milton.
Arthur, isn't it? Arthur Morgan?
Who are you?
Yes, Arthur Morgan, van der Linde's most trusted associate. You've read the files. Typical case. Orphan street kid seduced by that maniac's silver tongue and matures into a degenerate murderer. Agent Milton? Agent Ross. Pinkerton Detective Agency, seconded to the United States government. Nice to finally meet. We know a lot about you.
Do you?
You're a wanted man, Mr. Morgan. There's $5,000 for your head alone.
$5,000? For me? Can I turn myself in?
This is the first time we get a sense of scale to compare the van der Linde gang's notoriety to. If the bounty on the head of Arthur Morgan is $5,000, what's the bounty that's on Dutch's head? We may not find out, but the rest of the conversation implies that Dutch's bounty might be significantly higher, as the Pinkertons very quickly demonstrate that they are not here to arrest Arthur, but instead want a greater prize.
We want van der Linde.
Old Dutch. I haven't seen him for months.
That's so. Because I heard a guy fitting his description robbed a train belonging to Leviticus Cornwall up near Granite Pass.
Oh, ain't that a little old-fashioned nowadays?
Apparently not. Listen. This is my offer, Mr. Morgan. Bring in van der Linde, and you have my word you won't swing.
Oh, I ain't gonna swing anyways, Agent
Milton.
You see, I haven't done anything wrong, aside from not playing the games to your rules.
Spare me the philosophy lesson. I've already heard it from Mac Callender.
Matt Callender.
He was pretty shot up by the time I got to him. So really, it was more of a mercy killing. Slow, but merciful.
You enjoy being a rich man's toy, do you?
I enjoy society, flaws and all. You people venerate savagery, and you will die. Savagely, all of you.
Oh, we're all gonna die, Agent.
Some of us sooner than others. Good day, Mr. Morgan.
Goodbye.
Enjoy your fishing, kid, while you still can.
Aside from the foreshadowing final line from Agent Ross, who is relatively insignificant in this story but goes on to become a major antagonist in the original Red Dead Redemption, we learn that Mac Callender is dead and Agent Milton claims to be the one who finished him off. We don't see Mac Callender at all in this game, let alone again, so we have no reason to disbelieve Agent Milton. So on the one hand, you could argue he's proven to be a ruthless killer. However, it's his disrespectful description of the event that gets a rise out of Arthur, and I perceive that infuriating demeanour and approach to be deliberate. Milton is tactically playing with Arthur here. He states that he wants Arthur to bring Dutch in, and in return promises that Arthur's life will be spared. But considering they keep files on Dutch and his gang, and Arthur, as proven by that conversation, is no doubt part of that file, they know just how far back he and Dutch go, and therefore Milton already knows that Arthur won't turn. This is a cunning move, because to Arthur it appears as if the Pinkertons are fumbling around attempting to cultivate an inside man when they don't understand the extent of Dutch van der Linde's cult of personality that both keeps his gang together but also armours him. But the truth is, Agent Milton knew that making contact with Arthur Morgan would ensure that Dutch knew they were sniffing around, and Arthur's loyalty would perhaps demonstrate to Dutch that the Pinkertons aren't actually that big of a problem, and perhaps as a result he underestimates them, which is a mindset that'll allow him to make the mistakes the Pinkertons require in order to catch him.
I say we do nothing.
It's also interesting that the Pinkertons managed to find Arthur so painfully close to the camp. Milton knows Dutch is in the area, he's proven that Dutch's gang members are in the area, and approaches Arthur only a stone's throw from the camp's location. It's rather clear that Milton knows pretty much where he can find the man he's really looking for. Even if he doesn't know the exact location, he'll know in his file that no doubt contains extensive research on Dutch and his gang, as gone over in the historical segment to this video, what locations in this region would fit the bill for the gang to set up camp. And as a result, he's likely aware it's an easily defended position, and the van der Linde gang at this point in the narrative is not short of capable guns. And whilst brute force might be an option, perhaps flushing the gang out and ambushing them as a reserved measure might make more tactical sense. Not so much in the sense that it would negate the risk of wasting needless lives, because to a man as ruthless as Agent Milton is trying to present himself, that would just be a happy accident, but rather because it'll be easier to pick up the trail of a caravan on the move, now that they've narrowed down Dutch's location rather specifically. And if that was Milton's plan for the time being, Dutch doesn't take the bait. Instead of acting rashly in this moment, Dutch decides to stay put and wait. And neither Agent Milton nor Agent Ross show up again in this chapter. And perhaps that means Dutch's tactic paid off here, but the gang made no shortage of noise really, and it wasn't long before they were tracked down by another adversary, Leviticus Cornwall, resulting in a massive gunfight through the town of Valentine nearby, forcing the gang to move anyway, shifting over into the state of Lemoyne to a camp at Clemens Point, not far from the town of Rhodes. It's here when in the town of Rhodes that Josiah Trelawney gives us an interesting warning.
I've heard about bounty.
There's been a price on my head for 13 years. It'll take 'em months to find us down here, and it seems like we can have a little sport.
Well, they're good bounties.
Where you hear this?
Some fellas I met at a camp near the state line said there was talk of it in bars in the north and west for 500 miles. There was talk of super agents of some sort.
Super agents. I'd love to meet one. It's just talk.
I'm sure it is, but I couldn't not tell you.
I always dismiss this as a Trelawney exaggeration, and for the record, perhaps that's partially the case. But when it came to analysing this for this video, I realised when he references super agents, it actually might mean something a bit deeper. Not that Josiah Trelawney would necessarily be actively conscious about this, but one of the core themes of Red Dead Redemption 2's narrative is the death of the old ways of the West and the expansion of modern society. The development of the main characters and the downfall of the gang is marked by how they adapt to that, or more accurately fail to adapt to that. I see this dialogue applying that to the broader world. To the average individual of the dying Old West, the Pinkertons, for example, as an advanced detective agency, employing more advanced techniques than were standard for the time, may indeed come across as a super agent. So what I interpret Josiah to be telling Dutch now, even if unwittingly, is a warning of the modernising methods of law enforcement. But will Dutch heed this warning? Will he fuck? He's already focusing on his next mark, his next score, the Greys, the Braithwaites, the blood feud, and the supposed treasure at its centre. Dutch constantly underestimates the danger posed to his very way of life by the modernisation of society, and that will perhaps prove to be Agent Milton's greatest ally. Perhaps now's the best time to wander off and briefly discuss how the Pinkertons can be interacted with in the open world. Unlike other factions in the game, they show up quite rarely when exploring and tend to stick to their story appearances, but they'll reliably spawn if, for example, you mooch down to Blackwater as Arthur Morgan and start causing massive problems. But this isn't a canon interaction, rather it's just a failsafe to prevent you from going to places the game doesn't want you to go yet. So the game will keep throwing Pinkertons at you until either you die, which is certainly guaranteed unless you activate God mode via mods, or the game crashes. There's nothing really to gain from doing this, but it might cure boredom for a little bit. They are purely there as a deterrence from venturing south onto the Great Plains or even further south, where you might encounter the invisible sniper. However, for the time being, in areas where you're actually supposed to be, the Pinkertons don't really show up at all when passing through the world on a whim. Before we get into their next appearance, we learn that the Pinkertons, as depicted in Red Dead Redemption 2 anyway, are not above dealing with gangs provided it aligns with their objectives. And this is demonstrated during the Chapter 3 main story mission Blessed Are the Peacemakers, in which Pearson and Micah float the idea of making peace with the O'Driscolls at long last with Dutch.
They want a parley? It's a trap.
Well, of course, it's probably a trap, but what do we got to lose finding out?
Get shot.
The gang are aware that this is likely a trap. However, for the time being, that remains unclear, and Dutch agrees to meet with Colm O'Driscoll in the centre of the Heartlands. It's here where, after a brief, tense interaction, O'Driscoll's plan gets set into motion.
They offered me a price, Dutch, to bring you in.
Why didn't you take it?
Well, still might.
What are we doing here? Go home. Is this thing over?
Did I kill you?
Oh, not yet.
No, of course not. Not yet, but I will.
Let me go, Colm, and end all this crap between you two. We all got real problems now.
The way I see it, they get him, they forget about me.
They ain't the forgetting sort. If I were you, I'd run as soon as I had the money.
Oh, I know you would. But see, we lure an angry Dutch in to rescue you, grab all of you and hand you in, then disappear.
So you only met with him to grab me?
Of course. He's gonna be so mad, he gonna come raging over here. And a whole lot of you. And the law will be waiting for him. Arthur. Arthur, I missed you.
It's unclear to what extent the law is collaborating with the O'Driscolls, but it's clear that Colm O'Driscoll has some form of agreement. But as Arthur kind of suggests, even if he works with the Pinkertons today, they'll still come for him tomorrow. They aren't the forgetting sort. Regardless, this plan is foiled when Arthur manages to make an escape. As for the remainder of Chapter 3, the gang continue to make noise. The Greys and Braithwaite suss them out, leading to violent consequences. And though John Marston's son Jack goes missing, it's clear it's important that the gang must move on once again. And it's at this moment that Milton decides to show his face in camp.
Dutch, we got a problem.
Not a problem. Visitors. A solution. Good day, fine people. Mr. Vanderlind, Mr. Matthews, I presume. And who are you?
Rip Van Winkle.
Huh. Good day, sir. Agent Milton, Pinkerton Detective Agency. Agent Ross. Ah, Mr. Morgan, nice to see you again.
And to what do we owe the pleasure, Agent Moron?
I don't know if you're aware, but this is a civilized land now. We didn't kill all them savages only to allow the likes of you to act like human dignity, and basic decency was outmoded or not yet invented. This thing, it's done.
This place ain't no such thing as civilized. It's man, so in love with greed, He has forgotten himself and found only appetites.
And as a consequence, that lets you take what you please, kill whom you please, and hang the rest of us? Who made you the messiah to these lost souls you've led so horribly astray?
I'm nothing but a seeker, Mr. Milton.
You ain't much of anything more than a killer, Mr. Vanderlind. But I came to make a deal. It's time. You come with me, and I give the rest of you 3 days to run off, disappear, and go and live like human beings someplace else.
You came for me? Risk life and limb in this den of lowlifes and murderers so that they might live and love? Ain't that fine?
I don't want to kill all these folk, Dutch. Just you.
In that case, it'd be my honor to join you. Excuse me, friends. I have an appointment to keep with...
I think your new friend should leave now, Dutch.
You're making a big mistake. All of you.
Yeah, dreadful. We have got something. Something to live and die for. How awful for us. Mr. Milton, stop following us. We'll be gone soon.
I'm afraid I can't. And when I return, I'll be with 50 men. All of you will die. Run away from this place, you fools! Run!
Come on.
Get your damn hands off of me, boy.
What now? We get out of here. And quick.
There are a few nuggets of interest there. For example, John Marston doesn't appear to be on the Pinkertons' radar. They don't know his name. They are completely unfamiliar with him. Considering Milton's apparent protege is Edgar Ross, that will change before the end of the story. Secondly, it's interesting that Milton would walk into camp just with Ross and allow himself to be completely surrounded by Dutch's boys. Even if he was fairly certain that wouldn't result in him getting shot, it's clear that Milton is not somebody that can be intimidated. He walks into camp to A, meet Dutch face to face, but also to show him and his gang that they cannot outrun him. He also attempts to prove that Dutch isn't quite as unselfish as he tries to come across, offering the other gang members time to escape if Dutch hands himself over on the spot. But considering how much the Pinkertons actually demonstrate they know about Dutch, I can't imagine that Milton doesn't already know the outcome of that offer. Maybe he's trying to prove a point or even justify what's coming next, because in his next dialogue he promises reckoning, and the only way for the gang to escape it would be to disband. But we come away from this interaction with a good idea of how Agent Milton sees Dutch. He sees him as a parasite that preys on the weak, one whose philosophy serves little more than to excuse heinous actions, and a dangerous master manipulator who can convince others to do the same thing. In other words, from Agent Milton's perspective, criminals seldom come more dangerous than Dutch van der Linde. It comes across as if Milton knows his enemy and more importantly knows the threat he poses to the self-admitted flawed society that he serves. But I don't think at this point in the narrative anyway, the van der Linde gang is necessarily aware of the extent of the threat that Agent Milton, Agent Ross and the Pinkerton Detective Agency pose to them. He demonstrated his intelligence in tracking Arthur down near Horseshoe Overlook. He demonstrated his resourcefulness in tracking Dutch down and the gang by extension to Clemens Point, but by chapter 4 I think it's clear that conversation isn't enough. Agent Milton and the Pinkertons' next appearance comes towards the end of chapter 4, a chapter in which the gang grapples with the modernization of organised crime within the city of Saint-Denis. As the world is becoming more interconnected and the closer the gang is getting to civilization, the harder it is for them to function as they traditionally would, because the world is changing and the law is now too abundant and too quick. The solution proposed when attempting to rob the bank within the city is to form a good old-fashioned distraction.
I love that, Jose!
At first, the bank robbery goes according to the script, but that would not remain the case for long.
The problem out here!
Come out! It's over!
Shit. Abigail.
Dutch! Get out here! Get out here now!
Someone must have squealed.
Never should have gone after Bronte, Dutch.
Mr. Milton? Let my friends go! Or folks, they are gonna get shot unnecessarily!
Your friend? Why would I do that?
Come on, Milton!
It's over. No more bargains, no more deals.
Mr. Milton, this is America. You can always cut a deal.
I've given you enough chances.
Come on!
No!
God damn it! There's your deal, Dutch.
In killing Hosea Matthews, not only has Milton done irreparable damage to the stability of the structuring of Dutch's gang, but he's also given the Van der Linde gang a first-hand account of his ruthlessness. This is not the first loss or even the second loss that the gang faces in the story of this game, but it is certainly the heaviest blow the gang has been dealt thus far. And because of how Hosea's death shifts the power dynamic, not only does it cause panic amongst the gang during the bank robbery mission, but also throughout the rest of the remaining chapters. As for Milton's stance, well, deals are now officially off the table. This is because Dutch has nothing to bargain with. As for the following gunfight, the Pinkertons demonstrate their capacity to hurl massive numbers of men at the situation. As a result, John Marston gets arrested in the bank and Lenny Summers is gunned down. Agent Milton in this scenario truly has Dutch van der Linde on the back foot. Regardless, the remaining present gang members manage to seek refuge in an unused building, where they remain until night when they take their chances and evade Pinkerton patrols before escaping the city via boat. And even that wouldn't have been possible without the selfless actions of Charles Smith drawing the Pinkertons' attention away from the docks. There's no real Pinkerton activity to boast in the Guarma chapter, and the most important takeaway in this short segment away from the open world is that Dutch appears to be losing his marbles, which he demonstrates through increasingly erratic behaviour. But upon the gang members' return to the United States, they split up in search of the rest of the gang, which leads Arthur back to the now abandoned Chapter 4 gang hideout, Shady Belle. He finds a kind of coded letter that tells him the gang is now in Lakay. But before Arthur can act on that and find his lost friends, there is an almost literal knock on the door.
Milton keeps sending us back every day to search this place.
There quite clearly isn't a gang of outlaws holed up here.
Someone is here. Look, those are fresh footprints. Looks like someone might be here right now.
Sure, someone is here. There's always someone everywhere.
Well, let's look around then, see if we can find something for Mr. Milton.
Mr. Milton, I'd like to find a poisonous snake for him.
That's enough, Mr. Johns. You take Mr. Bunter and search around back. Mr. Orley, let's head inside. Gentlemen, be careful.
Milton has been sending men every day to the gang's Chapter 4 camp, demonstrating once again that his ability to track the gang is no fluke. As for other details picked up in this Pinkerton encounter, perhaps the most interesting one is Pinkerton agent Mr. John's expression of contempt for Milton, and whilst who I assume is the senior agent on site rapidly brings the focus back to their task, this still perhaps suggests that Milton isn't especially liked within his own agency. We know him to be a cunning, ruthless, sadistic man who outright executed Hosea Matthews even though he had already surrendered and theoretically posed no threat. And the dialogue here suggests that even to other Pinkertons, he's a rather disagreeable chap. But fortunately, I have something else that these guys will disagree with. But at least Mr. Johns doesn't have to worry about Milton anymore. But as a cool, easily missed extra detail for this particular interaction, if you do not find Sadie's letter before the Pinkertons arrive, when conducting their search, they will find it for us.
Found a letter. Mr. Tacitus Kilgore. That name mean anything to you?
No, I don't think so. I've not yet read the case notes. I've been working on a different case until last week.
Dear Uncle Tacitus, I do so hope you enjoyed your vacation. Lucky you leaving like that, and you always suggested you were too old for travel. I hope you and your cousins enjoyed yourselves. Me and your grandnieces have decided to take a trip of our own as the place has become so dreary and God-forsaken in your absence. We have gone to visit relatives from Daddy's side. You are not yet acquainted with them in Laquais, a small village just north of Saint Denis. It's buggy and muggy, but apparently neither is too bad at this time of the year. Please come see us when you can. Yours sincerely, Caroline.
It's a trap. So we gotta go find Laquais. That's where they're holed up.
How can you tell?
Even a child could shoot through that balderdash. Keep looking. See what else you can find.
This missable detail shows us that the Pinkertons are quite adept at seeing through a mild amount of bollocks, but then again, anybody could see clean through that letter. Regardless of whether or not the Pinkertons at Shady Belle discovered the letter, however, the reunion for the Van der Linde gang is interrupted very quickly.
This is Agent Milton with the Pinkerton Detective Agency.
Already?
On behalf of Cornwall, Kerosene and Tar, the United States government, and the Commonwealth of West Elizabeth.
Here we go.
We are here to arrest you. Come out with your hands up.
Give them to a count of 5, then give them everything. Actually, let them have it.
No! Asked everyone you could find, did you?
Follow me!
Agent Milton displays that he has no interest in taking the gang alive. He has no interest in parleying. He simply wants them to die. This is also where he discloses whose behalf the Pinkerton Detective Agency are hunting the gang on. Leviticus Cornwall. In not giving the Van der Linde gang a chance to surrender, Agent Milton demonstrates once again his ruthlessness, and if not for the actions of Sadie Adler and Arthur Morgan, no doubt the gang would have been slaughtered.
Okay, take it.
You mistook it for weakness. Now I will show strength, and you may mistake it for brutality. There is no escape for any of you. I shall hunt you to the ends of the earth and the end of time. I killed your friends.
Really starting to irritate me.
Each and every one of you.
Milton's dialogue here certainly bridges the gap between his caliber and that of Dutch Van der Linde. He claims that he enjoyed killing Dutch's friends, reinforcing what we know already, and that is that he is both ruthless and sadistic. The primary difference between his kills and somebody like Dutch's, for example, or even Arthur Morgan's, is the side of the law being served. His actions and his words have proven that he is every bit as vicious as the outlaws he hunts, and that is perhaps what renders him an effective thorn in the gang's side. I'm not entirely sure where Milton slinks off to when Arthur Morgan starts blasting. Does he immediately retreat upon seeing Arthur, or does he teleport? It's unclear. One moment he was there, the next he's gone. But for the time being, Arthur and Sadie, with the aid of Bill Williamson, managed to successfully repel the Pinkerton assault. And this once again buys the gang the precious time needed in order to relocate, driving the gang to set up camp at a cave named Beaver Hollow nearby to the town of Annesburg. Upon arrival here, Molly O'Shea has something of a revelation.
Oh, Dutch! Did you miss me?
I found her drunk in Saint Denis.
You're back. How jolly, Miss
It's
O'Shea.
funny, you suck of shit.
Back
Who are
and
you?
drunk.
The Master, the Lord
Molly,
God Almighty.
calm down.
I won't be ignored. Dutch Van der Linde, I amn't him. I ain't her. Or any of your stooges.
Calm
You
yourself.
don't owe me nothing.
Miss.
I don't owe you nothing. Nothing.
Okay.
I'll spit in your eye. I did. I told them.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I told them and I tell them again. Now I've got God's ear.
You told who what?
Mr. Milton and Mr. Ross about the bank robbery, and I wanted them to kill you.
You did what?
I loved you, you goddamn bastard! Go on,
She's
shoot me!
crazy. She ain't worth it.
You told on me.
Oh, you're
You
not so
betrayed
big now,
me.
are you?
Why?
Just calm down.
Arthur,
She's a fool. Get her out of here.
you know the rules.
Oh, not so big now! Are we, Your Majesty?
You...
Molly O'Shea claims that she had been acting as an informant for the Pinkertons. A questionable confession, but one that lines up with an interesting interaction from back in Chapter 3 between her and Arthur. Regardless of its authenticity, her confession cost her her life. But this gives Micah the notion that there might be a rat or a traitor within the gang.
Micah reckons there's a rat.
Oh, does he? On what evidence?
He's only back a minute. Pinkertons show up.
We've been on the run since you two fools went crazy in Blackwater. We barely escaped with our lives in Saint Denis. Now we got a rat.
Well, Molly clearly talked, but who else?
Maybe we pushed things too hard. Maybe time for folks like us is past. We don't need a rat. We got sloppier than the town drunk, and they know who we are, and where we are, and what we're doing.
It's interesting that Micah would bring up the notion of there being a rat. However, Arthur also has a point. The gang has been incredibly sloppy, and no doubt that has astronomically contributed to their misfortune. But for the time being, Dutch's plan is to go and have a chat with the man bankrolling the Pinkertons, Leviticus Cornwall himself.
I want to thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Cornwall.
This was a business meeting, Mr. Milton. We are not friends. I have spent a considerable fortune with your agency, and still nothing. This Vanderlyn robs me and laughs at me. I asked for the best. I paid for the best.
We are very close, Mr. Cornwall. I know you've heard this before.
Chance, sir, send a telegram to Goldberg in New York. Tell him I won't borrow it more than 3.2%. Sorry, no, I have heard it before. And get that army man to pay his portage charge.
Yes, sir. We are doing all we can within the confines of the law.
The law? I think we both know what you can do with your law. Find me Dutch Vanderlyn. Bring him here. And leave the laws to them as need them. Good day, sir.
It's quite interesting that Milton stresses to his employer, Leviticus Cornwall, that he is confined to the law. We've seen Milton carry out some rather ruthless, morally questionable acts. But compared to the robber baron Cornwall, Andrew Milton has limits, boundaries, perhaps even restraint. Perhaps that's a redeeming quality, but no doubt, in his mind, he sees that as the main thing that separates him from the criminals. But his employer, whose interests he's meant to be protecting, has no interest in what's legal versus what's not. Leviticus Cornwall is morally bankrupt, and wealthy to the point where the law no longer applies to him. No doubt an arrogant tyrant such as him is bullying the Pinkertons for results, but Dutch kind of kills him, so that's nice. In Dutch's mind, his actions have severed the head of the snake, but if the shootout that follows is any indication, that doesn't mean the Pinkerton Detective Agency is simply going to start leaving him alone now. If anything, it escalates the situation. In fact, after this point in Chapter 6, or at least around this point, throughout the Roanoke Ridge region, especially surrounding the town of Annesburg, we can actually encounter Pinkertons in the open world for once. They'll set up these checkpoints marked by red mist on the map, and if we get too close, they will detect us, leaving us with the only option of shooting our way out of trouble. It doesn't add very much aside from an immersion factor, but it is there. As for what happens next in Chapter 6, Arthur Morgan and Bill Williamson steal some dynamite from Van Horn, which of course results in another confrontation with the Pinkertons. But with the dynamite acquired, Arthur and John can go and blow up a bridge so they can rob a train. The gang creates a lot of noise and a lot of smoke in this chapter in order to divert attention away from themselves and at the same time rob one last score and get away, which doesn't really work out too great, with the train robbery, whilst successful, resulting in John getting shot and presumed dead. But as that was happening, the Pinkertons made their way to camp and took Abigail. Aside from Sadie and Arthur, the gang write her off as lost, leaving just the two of them to rescue their friend, and of course have one final confrontation with Agent Andrew Milton.
get out of here.
Calm down, Mr. Morgan. That's quite a cough.
Sure. Tuberculosis. I'll be dead soon. And you with me, Mr. Milton?
You'll be dead, sure. But I'm gonna be just fine. We offered you a deal, Mr. Morgan. Should have taken it.
I'm a fool, Mr. Milton.
Not all you boys have quite so many scruples. Old Micah Bell.
Micah? You mean Molly?
Molly O'Shea? Sweated her a couple of times, never talked a word, had to let her go. Micah Bell. We picked him up when you boys came back from the Caribbean, and he's been a good boy ever since.
Okay. Okay.
Using your strength, Mr. Morgan.
You're still a yapping dog, Mr. Milton.
Horrible man.
And with that, Agent Andrew Milton, one of the primary antagonists in the game, is dead. But he didn't die without sowing more chaos within the gang in revealing to Arthur Morgan the identity of the rat, Micah Bell. As it turns out, he's been informing on the gang since they got back from Guarma. Agent Milton left the gang shattered, and Arthur Morgan now has no choice but to simply shatter it more. Even though he didn't live to see his mission's end, Agent Milton was successful in bringing an end to the Van der Linde gang, leaving Edgar Ross, who would go on to be Red Dead Redemption's main antagonist, to bring a finish to Milton's work. And that results in the gang completely splitting apart, Arthur Morgan's death, and John Marston turning to his family, and by extension turning his back on the life of crime he once lived. But his past won't stay buried forever. Perhaps in seeking vengeance against Micah Bell in 1907, Agent Ross would be able to track John Marston down and finally bring an end to Dutch and his boys. And all of that is because of the strategic actions of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency in the fictional events of Red Dead Redemption 2. And the true architect of the gang's downfall wasn't Micah Bell, he was just a tool, but rather Dutch van der Linde himself. However, the master manipulator was manipulated by Agent Andrew Milton, whose methodical and ruthless actions had no small part to play in the calamity of the Van der Linde gang. As for Milton's moral standing, well...
I've been around long enough to know you don't hire a saint to catch a sinner.
Today, the Pinkertons still exist under the name Pinkerton as subsidiaries to Securitas AB. And to reiterate the disclaimer, the events of Red Dead Redemption 2 and the Pinkerton involvement is fascinating, albeit fictional, bringing us to the end of this long haul of a video. Thank you all for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed this one. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. That would be massively appreciated. And if you like the historical part at the start of the video, maybe subscribe to my history channel Decades. That would also be hugely appreciated and go a long way in helping us get that properly established, up and running and all that stuff. We're doing well. We've got almost 60 videos over there for you to enjoy. So if you like history, maybe give it a gander. And as one final thing, recently I was involved in a collaborative project between several creators within the Red Dead space, and it's the first time that I've collaborated with that many people in the Red Dead community. I do tend to keep to myself an awful lot, I will not lie. It was massive fun, so big thank you to Zonkers for inviting me to join them in indulging on the prospect of what another Red Dead game could be about. So if that's a video you want to watch, there'll be a link in the description. Please go check it out, subscribe to Zonkers, they deserve it. But that's all from me today, I know, thank God. Thanks again for watching, take care, and goodbye.